The Girl Who Lost Herself by Rowland. Chapter 1. Spend enough time in the darkness, and when the sun finally rises, it's blinding. I work a lot of odd jobs: private security, personal bodyguard. I work the doors in security and nightclub. I even help the police sometimes. When your only goal is to get by, you take what you can get. The night was clear and a bit cold, and I stood outside the door of a nightclub in Hollywood. Ground cars and buses drove past when the light was green, but the taxi stand in front of me was empty. Pedestrians passed the door every few minutes, though most of the foot traffic was across the street. The nightclub was one of those retro places that are fashionable these days. It had the velvet rope just outside the door, and I held a clipboard, the kind I hadn't known they still made, a paper guest list just clipped to it. The only concessions to the modern was the holographic aisle mandated by the city that corralled a few people who waited outside the front door. I stood just outside the door, clipboard in hand and a tie around my neck, lit by the neon sign that glowed bright above my head. Everyone in line had been told that there was a private party inside, that the club had been rented for the night and that they weren't getting in, but they still refused to leave. They stood in line, but every now and then someone stepped out, either through the holographic display or past the people behind them. After a few hours, I was left with only 20 or so outside a club they wouldn't get into. I stood there, silent and stationary, as a car stopped at the taxi stand and a movie star climbed out, a few hangers-on in tow. She approached the door like she owned the place. I knew who she was, but she still walked up to me, announced her name, and asked if she was on the list. I checked, just to placate her ego. She was near the top, but I shifted through pages, pretending to find her name, then pulled the rope aside for her. She stepped into the smoke and noise of the club, followed by her friends, and the swinging doors closed behind her. "Why'd you let her in?" someone asked. It was one of the kids at the head of the line. He and his friends were dressed in the latest street punk fashion of the day. They wore tight latex and leather, goggles, and the kind of leggings and sleeves that make them look like they have cheap prosthetics. The fake prosthetics were especially ironic in Hollywood, a town where they can afford the kind of top-of-the-line prosthetics that disabled veterans dream of. "She's on the list," I said. The street punk rolled his eyes. "Please, she's a nobody. What kind of loser rents a club and lets in a bunch of nobodies? This club probably sinks anyway. I bet I could just shove past you and go in whenever I want." I caught the implied warning. I held up the clipboard and the papers on it danced in the wind. "You're not on the list. You don't get in." The street punk laughed. "See, they don't even have tablets for the door guy. What kind of oldites still use paper?" he asked, and his friends laughed with him. "I bet they're just playing checkers and trying not to wet their pants. Come on, man, let me in. That'll get this party started." "You're not on the list. You don't get in." "Fine," the big mouth said. He tried to walk away, but stumbled into his friends. "Let's get out of here. There's a million better clubs in this town." The punks climbed through the holographic display and left. The tallest one, the one with the biggest mouth, stopped a few dozen yards down the street, turned and shouted something back at me. I didn't hear it over the traffic, but I had a feeling that I wasn't done with them. As the night wore on, things got quieter. A few more guests showed up, and some of them had the sense to assume they were on the list instead of making a scene. The head of security, an old friend named Chuck, came out and checked on me. I told him about the punks, but he didn't think too much of it. Call me paranoid, but I had a bad feeling, and it's only paranoia if I'm wrong. At 2 a.m, I was proven right. The line had cleared, but people had begun to come out. A few celebrities stood outside the club and smoked something other than cigarettes. They talked about working together in a drunken haze, but I ignored them and scanned the streets. That was when I saw the punks on their way back. "Hey, doorman, you gonna let us in now?" the loudmouth asked. He and his friends crossed the street, and as they stepped onto the curb, the tallest one reached to a friend behind him and took the machine rifle the other had ready. Things got interesting. I shoved the celebrities aside and knocked them to the ground, then dropped to one knee. I reached inside my coat and drew the pistol I kept there. A large, flashy thing that I have a concealed carry permit for, and aimed. The punk fired a burst into the door above my head, his aim unsteady. I fired, aimed at center mass, then steadied my weapon and fired 2 more times. Each shot hit the punk in the chest as the burst from his machine rifle went high and wide. His shots struck the steel-reinforced doors behind me instead of someone's too soft body. The punk fell back into the street, and all of his friends backed away. Blood pooled under the loudmouth and spread to the other punk's feet. I stood and used the radio to call inside. "Shooting at the front entrance. Shooter is down." I kept my pistol on the punks while I helped the celebrities up off the ground. The musicians accepted graciously, but the actress slapped my hand away and climbed up herself. She brushed her dress clean, what little of it there was, and glared at me. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." "That's fine, ma'am," I said, "as long as we're not hearing from the coroner." The door opened and 3 more security guards came out. 2 of them rounded up the street punks and had them sit against a wall while the 3rd looked over the loudmouth, then called the police. He gave me a look, then shrugged. The loudmouth was dead. 10 minutes later, police cars arrived. Some uniformed officers took the punks into custody, while others cordoned off the area. Crime scene analysts took measurements and pictures, while people from the coroner's office bagged up the loudmouth. At last, an unmarked car pulled up and a detective climbed out. He showed his badge and the cordon let him through. He took one look around the area, saw me, and groaned. "Andrew Miller," Detective Hugo de la Hoya said. "Why am I surprised to see you here?" I shrugged. "I don't know, Hugo. Maybe you're getting senile." "You know I could arrest you and work this all out in court, right?" Hugo asked. "If you could keep the attitude at a minimum, though, maybe we can all go home tonight instead. What do you say?" "I can try," I said. Hugo thanked me with a nod, then pushed the door open and led me inside. Hugo asked me questions, I answered them, and an eyewitness corroborated my story. There were multiple surveillance cameras on the front door, and after he reviewed the footage, Hugo agreed that I hadn't done anything wrong. It took an hour. The actress I'd shoved complained and asked how to file assault charges against me. A uniformed officer wrote down her statement and confirmed with her that everything was accurate. He then informed her in a professional manner that while she was free to press those charges, every judge in California would dismiss the case within minutes. She was allowed to leave, but fumed the whole way. The singer tried to say he was the one who shot the loudmouth, but since he was on probation, the police's questions soon got too uncomfortable for him. When the police were done, we were allowed to leave. As I walked out of the club, the party's host, a movie executive who had wanted to show off a new talent, came out the front door and handed me an envelope. "Here you go, big guy," he said through artificially perfect teeth. "This couldn't have gone better. I'll have every media agency in the country saying my client's name in the morning. Good job tonight." Inside the envelope were $100 bills. I pocketed the money as the executive climbed into his car and drove away. I rode the bus back to my apartment and stared out the window the whole time. Some new batch of idiot kids tried to cause trouble, but I pulled back my jacket to reveal the pistol beneath. They left me alone. At last, as the sun came up, I reached my stop and stepped off the bus a block from my apartment. There was some traffic on the sidewalk, and I had to work to avoid pedestrians and bike riders, both of which fought for space on the poorly maintained concrete. At the corner, I turned and moved away from the busier street. A delivery van rumbled down past. I crossed behind it and reached the front door of my building without incident. The door was locked, and an antique biometric palm scanner beside it had been shattered. I grumbled as I reached for my keys and let myself in. The building was old, inside and out. The fluorescent lights overhead gave off a sickly yellow glow that made the white walls and cheap tiles look diseased. Old furniture littered the foyer, stained by food, cigarette smoke, and more that I didn't care to think about. Just beside the elevator and stairs was a small office with a barred window that overlooked the lobby. No sooner had the doors closed behind me than I heard an old but powerful voice call my name. "Miller," Mrs. Okamba said from her usual seat near the window. "You're behind on rent. Go pay James." "Yes, ma'am," I said, and made my way to the office window. Behind the window, Mrs. Okamba's grandson, James, sat at a desk. He looked up at me with a sheepish smile. "Sorry, Andrew. I think she's just having one of her bad days. But she's right. You are behind on your rent." I nodded and pulled out the envelope from the club. "How much do I owe?" I asked. James told me. I frowned silently and pulled out most of the bills. I handed the money to James. "Here you go." James took the money, counted it, and slipped it into his shirt pocket. "Okay, you're all set. Sorry for the trouble." I told him it was all right and then nodded and made my way up to my apartment. The elevator had been built with the building and was in constant need of repair. It hadn't killed anyone yet, but I didn't want to tempt it, so I took the stairs to the 4th floor. I reached the landing and walked down the hall toward my apartment, happy to see it. For the time being, the scanner on my door was still in one piece. I entered my apartment, closing the door behind me, and let out a deep breath. I stepped into the kitchen, down the steps into the living room, and the lights came on automatically as my home system booted up. I removed my suit coat and tossed it onto the couch, followed shortly by my tie as I checked my messages. There was one from Chuck with an offer for a few days' work, one from a woman named Charlene who wanted to know when she could see me again, and two from Kara. I had no idea who Charlene was, but got the message within Kara's call. The sun was up and I'd been awake all night, so I grabbed a beer from the fridge, went out onto my little balcony, and lit a cigarette. It took a few minutes for my nerves to come down from the fight at the nightclub. The sound of daily life didn't help, but the beer and cigarette did, and within minutes, I was tired. I went back inside my kitchen, but found my chiller and pantries empty. The beer bottle and cigarette butt went into the government-approved waste bins and went to my bedroom. In there, the flashy handgun was locked in the gun safe. It had been a long night. Longer than I'd thought. Once in the darkness of my bedroom, I undressed and climbed into bed. Despite the darkness, I could see the room perfectly through my prosthetic eyes, but closed them, took a few deep breaths, and fell asleep quickly enough. I'd intended to sleep for at most an hour, but I woke up around noon and swore at myself. I climbed out of bed, dressed quickly in slacks and polyester shirt and sunglasses, and made my way to the living room. There was another message from Kara, and this time she wanted to know where I was. I called her back and left a message. I explained the night before and trusted that she would understand. My stomach waited until the call was done before it reminded me that I hadn't eaten in over 12 hours. With nothing in the apartment, I was forced to go out, so I retrieved my leather jacket, my daily carry pistol, and headed for the door. No smoking signs hung everywhere in my building, but on the street there were no rules against it. I lit a cigarette, but just as I finished, a woman walked past. As she did, she sneered at me. "Those things will kill you, you know." "This is LA," I said. "Everything will kill you." The sun was bright and warm as I walked down the street. The temperature wasn't helped by the lack of breeze, but as I stepped onto the main sidewalk, the passing cars moved some air. Trucks and buses moved along the ground, while air cars and taxis flew overhead. There was little foot traffic, mostly stay-at-home moms who went about their daily business. I minded my own as I moved down the street. I crossed a few blocks and stopped outside my destination. The cigarette was snuffed out and dumped into the ash can before I walked into Gramps. Gramps Diner is an old restaurant, founded 100 years ago and passed down through the generations. It's old, with outdated furniture and decorations, and the food is made the same way today as it was when it opened. There was a moderate lunch crowd, mostly neighborhood locals, but my usual place near the back corner was empty. I waved at Gramps as I moved to my table, and he tipped his spatula at me from the kitchen. I'd been seated for 10 seconds before the waitress came over. Vanessa was Gramps' granddaughter and had grown up in the restaurant. She was pretty and young, and with her father and 2 brothers in the restaurant, safe from unwanted advances. It was one of the reasons I ate there. "Hi, Andrew," Vanessa said. "Your usual?" I nodded. "And some coffee, thanks." Vanessa left, and as she did, she passed her brothers at the register and handed them $5. Her brother, Juan, waved at me from across the diner. While I waited for my order, I took in my surroundings. Most people either ate alone at the counter or in small groups in the booths. The groups conversed amongst themselves, and those at the counter focused on their meals, though a few of them shared the occasional word with the people seated around them. I looked over the dining room, confident I knew who was in there and where the exits were, then turned to look out the window and ignored the woman who stared at me from the far end of the bar. Vanessa brought my food with the coffee and frowned at me. "My brother and I had a bet. I said you'd order the same thing you always do. He thought you'd change it." "The coffee counts?" I asked. "Yeah," she said. "You usually order water." I shrugged. "I'll give you a big tip." That brought her smile back. "Thanks. Enjoy your meal." She walked away with a spring in her step and gave Juan a dirty look. Gramps makes the best cheeseburgers in East LA, and I never turned one down. I ordered the cheeseburger with a plate of fries and a Caesar salad. I was hungry, yes, but I also needed the calories. These days, everyone thinks prosthetic powers themselves, and a lot of them do, but the integrated ones, built into a person's body, are powered by their metabolisms. The more prosthetics someone has, the harder their metabolism has to work. I have a lot of prosthetics. I was halfway through my burger when the woman at the far end of the bar approached. She moved quickly, though sheepishly, past the other tables and around the lunch counter before she stopped at my table and abandoned all subtlety. "Excuse me," she said in a thick Mexican accent. "Are you Andrew Miller?" It's never a good sign when a stranger knows your name. I shook my head. "Nope, you have the wrong guy." "He said you would say that," she said. "My name is Olivia Del Monte. I need your help." I put down my burger and turned to her. "Who's he?" Olivia took a seat at my booth. "My neighbor, Jimmy. He said you were a good man." This Jimmy. Tall guy? Skinny? Good with electronics but awkward with people? I asked. She nodded. I know him. You shouldn't be talking to him. Please. I have nowhere else to go, Olivia said. My daughter is missing, and I'm afraid. Then go to the police. I took another bite of my burger. I'm not a detective. It was the way Olivia looked out the window that caught my attention. She didn't just glance toward the street. She actively scanned it. I checked the diner again. I can't go to the police. There are people following me. I don't know who they are, but I think they are law enforcement. What did your daughter do? I asked. Olivia leaned forward and clutched the crucifix around her neck. I don't know. She's only 16. She's just a little girl. She needs help. 16 is old enough and stupid enough to get into a lot of trouble. All right, tell me about your daughter. She's 16, she's smart, and she doesn't apply herself, Olivia said in the way only a mother could. She's taller than me, likes popular music, and hates school. I think she's angry because she doesn't know her father. Why doesn't she know her father? I asked. Olivia gave me a warning look, but I just frowned at her. You want me to find your daughter? I need information. Olivia glowered at me and clutched the cross tighter. Her father isn't around anymore. That is all I will say. I nodded. What's her name? Alicia, Olivia said. Alicia Del Monte. My burger was finished, and with it, my meal, apparently. If I'm going to find your daughter, I'll need more than just a name and an age. Who are her friends? Where did they live? Where does she go to school? Where do you live? What are her hobbies? I asked in quick succession. Do you have a picture, at least? A hopeful smile lit up Olivia's face. Yes, I do, she said, and reached into her purse. She rooted through it for a second, then pulled out a hollow pic and handed it across the table. Here, this is a recent picture. I took the picture and looked at it. Alicia Del Monte was a regular girl with shoulder-length black hair, dressed in modern fashionable clothes. In the picture, she was with some friends, 2 boys and a girl, and they all seemed happy together. Who took this pic? I did, Olivia said. What happened? I asked, before she went missing. Olivia sighed. We had a fight. She was staying out too late. I wanted her home earlier, but she didn't want to listen. So she yelled at me and I yelled back. She gets her passion from me. She offered a faint smile. Then she stormed out of the house and I haven't seen her since. When was this? 2 days ago, Olivia said. Mr. Miller, please. You have to help me get my little girl back. I frowned. First, it's Andrew. Not even my father was Mr. Miller. Second, what makes you think I will help, even if I can? Lots of kids go missing in LA. Some of them are never found. I can pay you, Olivia said. It's not much, but I have a few thousand in savings. If you find my daughter, I will give it all to you. Sometimes you have to do what you have to do to get by, and I could really use a job that paid. Yeah, I was caught up on my rent, but that had taken half of the cash I had. There were other bills too, and when you work freelance, you never know where your next paycheck would come from. Under the weight, it was hard to turn down any money, no matter where it came from. On the other hand, Olivia was a single mother who was scared for her daughter. I couldn't confirm that she was being followed, but that didn't matter. Even if it was paranoid, if I found the girl, it would solve the problem. Her story reminded me of things I'd tried to forget, as much as I tried to ignore it. My conscience spoke up. No, keep your money, I said, and grimaced to myself. Finding one girl shouldn't be that hard. You'll find my daughter? Olivia asked. She smiled, and tears welled up in her eyes. I'll try, I said. Can't make any promises.